Happy Monday! I'm the one behind the book. I hope you all had a good weekend. We're getting ready for chapter 4 and finding Atticus. But before we do that, just a little bit of the teacher in me, of course. So for chapter 4, we have some vocabulary and some of the words that you're going to hear in here. I'll give you the word and the definition, and then when you hear it, hopefully you'll understand what it means in the sentence if you didn't already know it. Relentless means someone doesn't give up, or they don't stop, they don't pause. Foreboding, it's like a warning feeling. Rustic is something that's old looking. Nonchalantly, that means you act as if it's no big deal. It doesn't matter. Lurched, it means like an abrupt movement forward. Dispensable means it's something that you can just throw it away. It doesn't matter. Queasy is when someone's feeling sick to their stomach. And procrastinating is to put something off, to wait on something. So I also have some questions for the ending, but for right now, I'll just give you a little recap where we left off on Friday. And at that point, Jamie had been to the cabin in the woods. Remember, she had to follow all the clues to get into the woods to the cabin that her father and uncle built. And she's been storing some supplies there in the cabin. And so now, the last line of that chapter was, she picked up her empty backpack. Well, Atticus, she said to herself, I hope this works for both our sakes. Chapter 4, Thursday, the runaway. After school, Jamie smuggled the last few items she needed out of the house in 2 backpacks. That was easy. The tricky part would be getting past her grandparents' house without Haley spotting her. Her sister would make a better watchdog than a German shepherd. Nothing got past her. But at least she wasn't home following Jamie around like a puppy. On days like today, when Jamie worked at the kennel or had after-school activities, her sister got off the bus at their grandparents' house just down the road. She stayed there until their mom got home from school. Jamie pulled her cell phone from her shorts pocket and glanced at the time. 3:10. If she timed it right, she could get past the farmhouse before Haley's bus dropped her off. It would be close, but she shot out of the driveway on her bike to try her best. The afternoon sun was relentless. Sweat dripped from her forehead and stung her eyes. At her grandparents' house, she skidded into the gravel driveway, dropping her sneakered foot to the ground to keep from wiping out as the bike went off balance with the extra weight of her loaded backpacks. She stopped behind the trunk of a decades-old maple tree next to the driveway. Her chest heaved with her labored breathing. She held her breath for a few seconds in order to listen. Although she couldn't see it, she heard the bus's brakes squeal as it stopped at a house down the hill and around the corner. Yes! Jamie yanked the bike back into the driveway and raced past the house. The bus had to make 3 more stops at the bottom of the hill. With her best guess, she figured she had 2 minutes before the bus would lumber up the hill and drop Haley at the end of the driveway. That was enough time for Jamie to get to the edge of the woods without being detected. When she got there, the cabin was eerily quiet, foreboding. It was as if the woods, the creatures, and even the cabin were aware of Jamie's risky plan. Even though it was dry outside, the cabin's dirt floor was damp, making it cooler. Leaving the door open to let out some of the musty wood odor, she unpacked her backpacks. The snacks for herself and food for Atticus were put high up on a shelf where she hoped the mice couldn't reach them. After placing 3 jar candles on different shelves around the cabin, she took one slow, sweeping look at her surroundings. The old gray boards gave the building a rustic look. If the situation weren't so serious, she might have enjoyed imagining she was a pioneer on the prairie. But this wasn't pretend. She was planning to take her own risks. A quiver of anticipation shot through her body. Well, I guess this is it, she mumbled. She sucked in her upper lip. Was she really going to do this? Would her mom and Charlotte understand why she had to do this? Before any doubts had the opportunity to tickle her conscience more, she hurried from the cabin. Yes, she was going to do this because there was no way she was giving up Atticus that easily. She sprinted out of the woods, turning back only once to glance at the cabin. She hoped she'd be able to find it in the dark. At the edge of the woods, she retrieved her bike from next to the fallen tree, mounted, and rushed to get to the kennel on time. The last thing she needed now was to arouse suspicion. Bringing her bike to a stop at the base of Charlotte's splintered wooden front porch steps, Jamie wondered if the word guilty was written across her forehead. Would she be able to act nonchalantly around Charlotte? The front screen door screeched as Charlotte pushed through it, followed by Pepper. "Hey there, kid. I hope you brought your muscles. We have to unload a bunch of dog food." Charlotte swiped the back of her wrist across her forehead, plastering a few stray strands of her red curly hair against her skin. The rest of the mass was pulled back in a loose, messy knot. Jamie stared past her and Pepper, waiting. Her heart lurched and her chest tightened. "Where's Atticus?" "In the kennel, in the air conditioning, of course. Boy, this humidity makes it feel more like the middle of August than the end of May." The muscles in Jamie's chest relaxed. She flipped down her kickstand. Act normal. "Yeah, it was hot in school, too. My science teacher, Miss Reynolds, has a thermometer on her desk, and it was 89 degrees at 1 o'clock. Pepper bounded down the stairs, his tail whipping the air. He shoved his muzzle into Jamie's hand, then scooted his body over to lean against her legs. His movements were so fast and forceful that she nearly lost her balance. She scratched behind his ears, and he groaned with satisfaction. She laughed at his noises. "You big baby." Charlotte adjusted the strap of her baby blue tank top. "I've gone to the dogs" was written in script across the front in navy blue letters. Blue jean shorts flared out over her hips and reached to mid-thigh. "I thought you had air conditioning in school." "Only the computer labs in the office. Everyone else in the school practically melts when it gets this hot." Trickles of sweat tickled their way down Jamie's back as if to add to the point. One of the dogs in the kennel suddenly started to howl, the sound muffled by the tightly closed wooden building. Pepper barked in response. Charlotte didn't have air conditioning for herself in the house, but she made sure she had it for the dogs in the kennel. When it was really hot, sometimes she'd sleep on a cot in the kennel office. Jamie hoped tonight wasn't one of those nights. "Well, no time to waste," Charlotte said, starting down the path. "The work's not going to get done by itself. Let's go, kid." Charlotte's sandals crunched on the crushed stone path that led to the kennel across the yard. Pepper plodded along next to Jamie, occasionally pushing his hot, wet nose against her leg. The sound of the crunching stones must have alerted the dogs to their approach, because a whole chorus of barks echoed inside the building. Charlotte pulled open the door. "What's with the racket in here?" Her voice and presence only encouraged the dogs more. They doubled their efforts to get her attention. Jamie and Pepper followed, walking down the main aisle between the large fenced-in pens. The dogs that got along with others were housed in large pens with high chain-link sides. Each pen had a dog door at the back to allow the dogs easy access to the fenced-in yard behind the kennel. On one side of the aisle were the kennels that held the dogs Charlotte was hired to train. There were 2 black labs, a yellow lab, 2 golden retrievers, and a Lhasa Apso currently in residence for that purpose. On the opposite side of the aisle were the boarders. In one, a tiny apricot-colored toy poodle yapped shrilly, running in circles and jumping against the kennel door. Occasionally, it thrust itself high enough to flip over and still land on its feet. Then it started the routine all over again. Jamie wasn't particularly fond of the small dogs because so often they seemed hyper, but this one's antics did make her giggle. "You're ready for the circus, Trixie." The little dog stopped for a moment, panted, and stared at her with bright eyes before starting the show again. Jamie laughed. "Knock yourself out. The more exercise you get yourself, the less I'll have to do." In the next pen, an old basset hound lay sprawled on a blanket, her big brown eyes barely visible beneath her sagging eyelids. White hairs from old age were sprinkled across her face. You took in a new boarder? How long is this one staying? Jamie kneeled to study the dog. Charlotte stopped at the doorway to the office and turned around. That's Princess. I'm not sure how long she's staying. Are the owners on vacation? Charlotte leaned against the door and pushed some wet tendrils of hair off her cheek. No, her owner is in a nursing home recovering from hip replacement surgery. The woman's children live out of state and asked the neighbor to take Princess to be put to sleep. So Greg called me and asked if I'd take her in. Greg was the veterinarian Charlotte used for all the kennel animals. Jamie wondered if he and Charlotte were also secretly dating. Is Princess sick? Jamie asked. No, the woman's kids just didn't want to be bothered with her. Princess rolled her big, sad-looking eyes to look at Jamie. Why do people think animals are dispensable? Look at her. All she wants is to be fed, watered, and loved. And, Charlotte added, according to Greg, the only thing that's keeping Mrs. Ford working hard in rehab is knowing that Princess is waiting for her to take her home. She pulled away from the door jamb. Here I am fighting to stay open, and I can't resist the charity case. No wonder my business is going down the drain. The reminder of Charlotte's financial difficulties jarred Jamie's thoughts back to reality. My grandpa always says things happen for a reason. I bet it's true this time, too. You know, it's probably why the family took Princess to Greg instead of some other vet who would have just put her to sleep because they paid him to do it. God knew you and Greg would save her. Charlotte snorted. Or, God knows I'm a sucker. Jamie stood and continued down the aisle. 3 other kennels housed a St. Bernard that was only staying for 4 days, 2 Shelties that would be spending 2 weeks while their owners were on a cruise, and Sam, a mixed-breed dog. His markings were that of a Doberman, but his fur and body were like a golden retriever. He stood by his door, patiently waiting for attention. His fawn-colored eyebrows lifted and lowered with every eye movement. Boy, if people could see the lot of you, they'd all want a dog's life, Charlotte said to the whole group. Charlotte had a reputation for keeping a clean, comfortable kennel where each dog received plenty of attention. She turned and walked into her office. Jamie heard the rolling chair squeak when Charlotte sat. The last 2 pens by the office were for Atticus and Pepper, but their doors were always open. Like all the other pens, theirs had a dog door that led to an outside fenced-in grassy area where they could go out and do their business, as Charlotte said. Part of Jamie's job was to make sure each dog had some kind of attention. Some of the dogs preferred to go out and play in groups with balls and frisbees. Others were content to just be petted or brushed. Atticus loved it all. Jamie knew where to find Atticus. She stepped into the office and, as she expected, he was stretched out on the wooden floor under the window air conditioner. When she entered, his tail thumped against the floor like he was playing a bass drum. His ears twitched and he sniffed the air, but he acted as if the effort of moving was more than he could consider. He's been there practically all day, Charlotte said. She nudged Atticus with her foot. He hates the heat. Jamie knelt next to him. You lazy mutt, she murmured. The irony of calling him a mutt didn't escape her. She wished he were a mutt, because then he wouldn't be so valuable. Atticus rolled his eyes and thumped his tail harder. Without looking up at Charlotte, she said, He looks so sad. Do you think he knows he's leaving Saturday? It was the first time since the dog show either of them had mentioned the subject of Atticus being sold, and the comment instantly electrified the air. Out of the corner of her eye, Jamie saw Charlotte stiffen. He's smart, but he's not that smart. He'll adjust. Jamie leaned over and pressed her face into the fur at his neck. I won't, she mumbled. Charlotte slapped the pile of papers against her desk. Jamie, I have no choice. You have to realize this is business. Leaving a hand on Atticus's furry shoulder, Jamie sat up on her knees. He's your pet, she snapped. Sell one of the other dogs. Charlotte's eyes widened. Jamie wasn't sure if it was because she was out of line for raising her voice, which she knew she was, or if Charlotte was just angry. Her mother would never accept her speaking to an adult that way, especially her godmother. You know that's ridiculous, Charlotte said, her voice tight. He's the only one who's earned enough points to make his puppies valuable, and I don't have time to wait for a litter. The collection agents are knocking at my door now. There'll be other dogs. Maybe I'll bargain to get one of his puppies. Jamie sensed Charlotte was trying to hold her temper, but she pushed anyway. It wouldn't be Atticus, she countered. Charlotte's eyes bored into Jamie. There was a long stretch with no sound in the office except the rattling hum of the air conditioner and Pepper's panting. I'm sorry that this is going to hurt you, Jamie. Charlotte picked up a stack of bills and waved them in the air. These bills aren't going away. They're just getting bigger. I need you to understand that it's not what I want to do, it's what I have to do. Tears shimmered in Charlotte's eyes. Making difficult decisions is part of life. We all have to do it at some time or another. Jamie's heart ached. It was wrong to treat Charlotte this way. She stood and hugged her. You're right. We'll have to do what we all have to do what we have to do. I understand that better than you know. I'm sorry I upset you. I won't say anything about it again, Char. Charlotte sniffled, took Jamie by the shoulders, and held her at arm's length. You're a great kid, Jamie. Jamie ducked her head. She didn't want Charlotte to look in her face. What if Charlotte could somehow see deep into her soul and know what she was planning? Thanks, Jamie whispered, her voice caught in her throat. There was a moment of silence, and then she cleared the lump. Well, time to get to work, boss. Jamie slapped her thigh. Let's go, Addie. Atticus leaped to his feet, his eyes bright and his tongue lolling out of the corner of his mouth. He followed Jamie out of the office, never leaving her side while she helped put away the food, cleaned pens, exercised the other dogs, and helped Charlotte feed. Despite being busy, her plans for the night crept into her every thought. By a little after 6 o'clock, all the work was done. Jamie found Charlotte in the office, her head bent over papers strewn across her desk. She was writing out a check when Jamie and Atticus entered. Pepper was curled up on a fluffy pad in the corner. All done, Jamie announced. She crossed to the little refrigerator on the shelf, took out a glass bottle of lemonade, and extended it toward Charlotte. Want one? Without looking up, Charlotte nodded. Sure, that'd be great. Jamie set Charlotte's on the desk next to her, then took another from the refrigerator and twisted off the cap. After several gulps of the blessedly cold, tart beverage, she backhanded her mouth and leaned against the wall. Seems like it's cooling off some. Uh-huh. Charlotte's acknowledgement was distracted. Jamie took a couple more swigs and then pushed away from the wall. Well, I have to get home and study. Finals start in a couple of weeks. Okay. Charlotte ripped the check out of the checkbook and then slipped it in a paper into an envelope. Jamie pushed her hands into her pockets. It was time to go into acting mode. Charlotte licked the envelope. Yeah? Can I go with you on Saturday when you take Atticus to the airport? Mike Williams, the man buying him, was paying to have Atticus flown to Illinois. Charlotte's head tipped up. You don't think that will be too hard on you? Jamie dropped her gaze to the floor. It's something I have to do. My grandpa says sometimes the hardest things to do are the most important. She kept her eyes averted in case Charlotte could see through her act. I wouldn't feel right if I wasn't there in case he's scared. When she glanced up again, Jamie saw the corners of Charlotte's mouth twitch. Then Charlotte rolled her lips in the way she always did when making a difficult decision. Well, if your mom agrees, I guess it'll be all right. I'm sure she'll say yes. Jamie leaned down to hug Charlotte. I'll see you tomorrow after school. I want to take Atticus for a nice long walk to the pond for a last swim. Charlotte opened her mouth, and Jamie was sure she knew what she was going to say, so she cut her off. It will make me feel better to do it with him one more time. Don't worry, I'll give him a bath after so he doesn't smell and he's ready for his trip. I promise. Charlotte's shoulders dropped, and she slumped back in the chair. I guess it'll be okay. Thanks, Char. Jamie turned to Atticus, who had commandeered a corner of the dog bed where Pepper was sleeping. She leaned down and ruffled his head. See you later, boy. After a quick kiss against the soft fur of his forehead, she patted Pepper, then stood. Think he'll sleep out here tonight? Charlotte nodded. Yeah, I think he'll be more comfortable in the air conditioning. Jamie moved to the door. What about you? I'll probably rough it in the house. Jamie hid her relief. Well, good night. See you tomorrow. Night, Jamie. Charlotte swiveled her chair back toward the desk and bent over her paperwork. Jamie nearly skipped out of the kennel. Once outside, she ducked under the office window so Charlotte wouldn't see her and went to the outside gate of Atticus's fenced-in area. For weeks, Charlotte had been complaining that the latch on the gate didn't work properly. Jamie wanted to be sure Charlotte hadn't quit procrastinating and had it fixed. The latch still hung limply against the bar, barely holding the gate in place. She closed her eyes and breathed a sigh of relief. So far, everything was falling into place. Jamie lay in her bed, fully clothed, listening and waiting for her mother's bedroom door to close. A thick book laid under Jamie's back, the corners pressing into her skin. She'd purposely put it there so she couldn't get comfortable and fall asleep. Shifting onto her other side, she gave her mother another half hour, hoping she'd be asleep. When she was convinced it was safe, she sneaked out of the house, fully aware of every tiny creak of the wooden stairs. The sky was moonless, but bright stars dotted the darkness through an occasional wispy veil of clouds. Before mounting her bike, Jamie checked the 2 flashlights she'd tucked in her backpack. The beam of one was narrow and faint, but the other had a wide, bright light that would be perfect for going through the woods. She tucked them back into her bag and pushed her bike away from the house. Once in the street, she jumped on the seat and raced through the darkness. When she came to the occasional street light, she moved to the opposite side of the road to remain in the shadows as much as possible. It took 15 minutes to reach Charté Kennels. She left her bike at the end of the driveway and tiptoed toward the kennel. Her skin tingled. She wasn't sure if her heart was racing from the bike ride or nerves. It pounded as she crept up the driveway, and as hard as she tried, she couldn't make it slow down. It reminded her of a horror story she'd read in class just a few weeks into the school year. Her English teacher, Mrs. Longworth, had played a CD of Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. In it, the guilty man could hear a heart pounding, and even though it was really his own heart and his guilty conscience, he was sure everyone else could hear the beating too. In the end, it made him confess to his crime. At the moment, Jamie could identify with the man's fear. She was sure the whole world, Charlotte especially, could hear her approaching just by her hammering heart. Keeping to the shadows, Jamie ducked behind a tree and stared toward the ranch-style house. Other than a faint beam that looked like a nightlight in Charlotte's kitchen, the rest of the house was dark. Like a thief, Jamie hunched over and dashed across the driveway to the side of the kennel. One of the dogs inside barked. She flattened herself against the building and held her breath. Of course, she should have thought of the fact that her approach would probably start the dog's barking. She waited with lungs ready to explode. Other than the one bark, everything was quiet. Slowly, she let her breath out. Again, she watched the house to see if there was any indication of Charlotte waking up, but there was nothing. Inch by inch, pressed against the building, she sidled along until she reached the gate to Atticus's outdoor pen. Her muscles were taut with attention as she grabbed the cold metal latch. The metal lightly clanked, and Jamie froze like a statue. No dogs responded to the noise, but it unnerved her enough that she thought any minute she would jump out of her skin. In the pond behind the barn, the frogs lifted their chorus. The deep-throated calls, like the sound of thick, tight rubber bands being snapped, normally would have soothed Amy. Tonight, it annoyed her. That and the low hum of the air conditioner in the office window made it difficult to know how much noise her movements were making. In slow motion, she swung the gate open just enough to wedge herself in. She wished she could take out her flashlight to make sure she wasn't stepping into something she shouldn't, but she couldn't risk that Charlotte would wake and see the light. So she took her chances and moved along the edge of the fence in darkness. When she reached the dog door that led inside, she knelt next to it. She knew when Charlotte left Atticus in the kennel that she also left his kennel door open so he could wander freely through the building. Pepper, too, was afforded that luxury, and that could be the only fault in her plan. If Pepper was sleeping in the kennel, too, he would try to come out with Atticus. Jamie stretched so she could see the side of the house. It looked like Charlotte's bedroom window was open, but there was a fan going in it. Charlotte would recognize Jamie's special whistle for Atticus, so Jamie had to be careful. She put her pointer fingers in her mouth to form the V and whistled, but it was so soft, hardly a noise was emitted. There was no response from inside the kennel. She looked over her shoulder at the house. Satisfied there was no movement, she turned back and whistled a bit louder. Still, there was no response. Her nervousness melted into disappointment. After all her planning, was it possible Atticus wasn't even in the kennel? And if he wasn't, then what would she do? She hadn't developed a plan B. At least with the kennel, she could make it look like the broken latch had failed and Atticus had pushed against it and gotten out. If he was in the house, there was no way she could make it look like he got out and ran away. The night air had cooled, and a chill shook her body. Every muscle ached from the tension. She had no choice. The kennel door would be locked. She would have to squeeze through Atticus's dog door to see if he was there. The plastic squeaked when she pushed her fingers against it. The tiny poodle yipped at the noise. Jamie stopped, her fingers holding the door partially up. "Trixie," she whispered loudly. "Shh, Trixie." The dog quieted abruptly. There was sound of movement inside. Jamie cocked her head and moved her ear closer. She could hear Trixie's toenails clicking against the cement as she paced in her pen. Jamie prayed until it sounded as if Trixie had settled, then she relaxed a bit. If she didn't collapse from a heart attack, she'd be lucky. She took a deep breath to settle her shaking hands and then gently pushed the dog door open more. Just as she moved in front of it to try and slip in, the door exploded back out at her. The shock threw her back and she toppled onto the damp grass. Before she could register what had happened, Atticus was over top of her, his big muscle just inches from her face. "Atticus," she hissed, "are you trying to kill me?" She sank her fingers into the fur and skin at his neck and jostled him. His tongue flicked out toward her cheek. Jamie turned her head just in time for the wet slobber to hit her ear. Enough already. She rolled away from him and got to her feet. She was surprised the other dogs hadn't started barking with the commotion, but the motor of the air conditioner might have been enough to cover the sounds outdoors. "You ready for an adventure, boy?" Jamie clicked her tongue to cue Atticus to follow her. At the gate, she slipped through first and then turned to coax him. She closed the gate against his body so it would appear it was open only enough for Atticus to fit through. She felt queasy, but fought the nausea. Even though her stomach was trying to tell her otherwise, she knew this was the right thing to do. For a moment, she pictured the Good Citizen Student of the Year plaque hanging on her wall. She had received the award at the end of 7th grade. It read, "For exemplary honesty and integrity, awarded to Jamie Reston." Jamie closed her eyes. She could picture her parents sitting in the auditorium, beaming with pride when she had received the award. The school had sent a letter inviting them to the award ceremony, but they weren't told what award she would receive. When she had been awarded the highest honor, she looked down from the stage to see her parents' proud expressions. Tears gleamed in her eyes, even her dad's. She opened her eyes and looked up toward the stars. What would her dad think of her actions now? Was he looking down at her from heaven with disappointment on his face? Was this one decision going to change the way everyone looked at her for the rest of her life? Next to her, Atticus pressed against her thigh. Jamie laid her palm on top of his head and looked down at him. She couldn't second-guess herself now. This was the only way she could save Atticus. Something tugged at her heart, and there was a catch in her throat. This was the only way to save herself. With a last glance at the dark house, she urged Atticus to follow her. They skirted the edge of the building. Once in the open, she dashed down the driveway to her bike. Atticus, apparently thinking they were playing a game, bounced in front of her and barked. "Atticus, no!" she scolded in a stage whisper. Her head and tail drooped. She snagged him by his head and tail drooped. She snagged him by the collar, dragged him toward a nearby bush, and squatted. Less than a minute later, the porch light came on, lighting the whole area in front of the house. Atticus lurched forward like he was going to go to the house, but Jamie wrapped her arms around his shoulders and held him back. "Stay," she whispered against his ear. Charlotte's front door squeaked open, and she stepped out onto the porch. Jamie peered through the branches at Charlotte's silhouette. From the top step, Charlotte was gazing toward the kennel. Finally, apparently satisfied that nothing was amiss, she turned and went back inside. When the porch light flicked off, Jamie collapsed against Atticus. "Don't do that to me again, Addie." With her fingers looped under his collar, she led him to her bike. She removed the leash from her backpack and clipped it on. Immediately alert and obedient, Atticus walked beside Jamie as she pushed the bike toward the end of the driveway. Once they were far enough away from the house, Jamie climbed onto the seat and pedaled away. Atticus trotted along beside the bike without resisting. He was the perfect runaway. And there's a picture of Jamie holding on to Atticus. Of course, here she looks happy. When Atticus barked and got Charlotte's attention, she wasn't smiling. So then, just a couple of questions for you to think about now that we've finished chapter 4. I'm wondering, what do you think about what Jamie is doing? Do you think it's okay? Why or why not? If you think it's okay, tell me why. If you think maybe it's not okay, I want to know why not. What consequences do you think there might be because of her decision to take Atticus? Like, if you did something like that, what do you think the consequences might be? I mean, she's doing it because she doesn't want him to be sold, and she wants to save him. And finally, what do you think could go wrong? She's going off on her bike with him on the side of the road, and it's dark. She does have flashlights, and we know that she's headed to that cabin. What do you think could go wrong? I hope you enjoyed chapter 4. Tomorrow at 1:30, we'll read chapter 5. I'm looking forward to that, and I'll post this video in just a few minutes. Have a good afternoon. Bye.